Madison Square Garden, June 1973. 19,842 people packed into every seat, every aisle, every standing space the fire marshals had already given up trying to clear. The air tasted of cigarette smoke, sweat, and the sharp metallic edge of anticipation. Overhead, the big lights burned white-hot on the blue mat. At the exact center of that mat, Bruce Lee was trapped. The giant's left hand was wrapped around his throat. Not a choke, a claim. 5 thick fingers dug into the sides of Bruce's neck, thumb pressing hard enough against the windpipe that every breath came thin and whistling. The giant's right hand pinned Bruce's left wrist high against his own chest, locking the smaller man in place like a specimen on a board. Bruce's bare feet barely touched the canvas. His black pants were streaked with blood that had already begun to dry dark. 3 long scratches ran diagonally across his chest, still wet, still shining under the lights. A thin cut above his right eyebrow had painted a red line down the side of his face. The giant was named Otis Titan Vance. 6'10", 348 pounds. Former powerlifter, former carnival strongman, current Worldwide Wrestling Federation special attraction. His arms were thicker than Bruce's thighs. His chest was a wall. His braided hair hung past his shoulders like black rope. He had not spoken a word since the bell rang 3 minutes and 41 seconds earlier. He did not need to. The crowd was already screaming for him. In the front row, a man in a white suit kept checking his watch. That man was Vince McMahon Sr. He had booked this match as a novelty, a one-night curiosity. The Dragon versus the Mountain. Ticket sales had exploded the moment the posters went up. Nobody expected it to last more than 2 minutes. Nobody expected Bruce Lee to still be conscious. Bruce's eyes were open. They did not look panicked. They looked busy. His right hand, the only free part of him, was held in a loose claw shape near his own shoulder, fingers curved, wrist relaxed. The referee, a solid blond man named Earl Hebner, stood 3 feet away with both palms raised, already preparing to call the match if Bruce's body went limp. Hebner's face showed pure confusion. He had refereed hundreds of matches. He had never seen a man this small still thinking while being held by a man this large. 30 seconds earlier, the sequence had been simple. Titan had charged. Bruce had slipped the first bear hug, rolled under a second, and landed a rapid series of finger jabs to the giant's floating ribs. The crowd had roared. Then Titan simply reached out, snatched Bruce by the throat mid-spin, and lifted him clean off the mat like a child lifting a doll. The lift had been so sudden that Bruce's momentum carried his legs forward and then dangling. That was the position the entire arena now stared at. In the production truck parked outside the garden, a director named Ray Krebs had both hands on the switcher. He was not cutting away. He was not even blinking. One of the camera operators on the floor was whispering into his headset. "He's still looking at him. The little guy is still looking right at him." Bruce's bare chest rose and fell in short, controlled breaths. The giant's grip was tightening by degrees. Titan's face remained calm, almost bored, the way a man looks when he knows the outcome is already decided. He began to walk forward, carrying Bruce toward the nearest turnbuckle, intending to drive the smaller man's spine into the metal post. That was the moment the story changed. Bruce's free right hand moved. Not a strike, a touch. 2 fingers found the exact soft spot on the underside of Titan's thick wrist, the place where the radial nerve runs close to the surface. Bruce pressed once, hard and precise. Titan's grip did not open. But the giant's left eyelid flickered, a micro-reaction. Bruce's eyes noted it. The crowd noise dropped half a tone, the way water drops when something heavy is about to fall into it. 19,000 people leaned forward at the same time without realizing they had done so. In the front row, Vince McMahon Sr. stopped checking his watch. Bruce's legs were still dangling. His left arm was still locked. Blood from the cut on his forehead had reached the corner of his mouth. He tasted iron and did not care. His mind was already 3 moves ahead of the giant's body. The turnbuckle was 6 steps away. Titan's weight was committed forward. The referee was still frozen. The cameras were still rolling. Bruce Lee had been trapped for exactly 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, he had already decided how he was going to leave the ring standing while the giant did not. The next 4 seconds would decide whether that decision lived or died on live television in front of the largest audience of his life. Section 2. The next 4 seconds began the instant Bruce's 2 fingers pressed into the soft underside of Titan's wrist. Titan's left eyelid flickered again. The giant's forward momentum did not stop, but the quality of the grip changed. The 5 thick fingers around Bruce's throat loosened by the width of a single playing card. Not enough for most men to notice. enough for Bruce Lee. Bruce's bare feet found the canvas for half a second. He did not try to pull free. Pulling would have told Titan exactly what he intended. Instead, he let his full body weight drop straight down, using the giant's own hold as a hinge. His throat slid half an inch lower in the thick hand. The blood from the cut above his eyes smeared across Titan's knuckles. The crowd saw only a smaller man collapsing. They did not see the angle of Bruce's hips changing, or the way his free right hand was already traveling upward along the giant's forearm like a snake climbing a tree. Titan took the third step toward the turnbuckle. His boots shook the mat. The referee, Earl Hebner, finally moved, raising one arm as if to separate them, but the space between the two men was already gone. Bruce's right hand reached the inside of Titan's elbow. 3 fingers dug into the tendon that controlled the giant's grip. At the same moment, Bruce's left knee rose and drove into the soft meat just above Titan's right hip, the place where the body folds when it carries heavy weight. The giant grunted. It was the first sound he had made since the match began. The grunt was low, surprised, almost offended. His left hand opened another fraction. Bruce's throat was free. He did not run. He stayed inside the giant's reach. The 4th second ended with Bruce's body spinning on the ball of his left foot. His right elbow smashed upward into the underside of Titan's jaw, not with full power, but with perfect timing. The giant's head snapped back half an inch. That half inch was all Bruce needed. He slipped under the still extended left arm, rolled across the blue canvas on one shoulder, and came up 3 feet away in a low crouch, hands open, weight balanced, breathing already steady again. The entire sequence from the nerve press to the roll had taken 4 seconds and 11 frames of film. 19,000 people made a sound that was not a cheer and not a gasp. It was the sound of a single collective breath being stolen and then returned all at once. In the production truck, Ray Krebs slammed his palm on the desk and shouted, "Stay on him! Do not cut! Stay on the little guy!" Titan turned, slow, deliberate, the way a mountain turns when something small has just bitten its ankle. He looked down at his own left hand as if it had betrayed him. Then he looked at Bruce. The calm boredom was gone from his face. In its place was something colder, recognition. Bruce wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with the back of his wrist. The 3 long scratches across his chest had begun to drip again. He did not look at them. He looked only at the giant's center line, the same place every fighter looks when the real fight is about to start. Titan took one heavy step forward. The mat dipped under his weight. He raised both arms in the classic wrestling pose of a man about to crush whatever stood in front of him. The crowd rose to its feet in a wave of noise that hit the upper decks like a physical force. Vince McMahon Sr. in the front row was no longer watching the match. He was watching the cameras, calculating how many homes were seeing this live. Bruce did not wait for the charge. He moved first. 3 short steps closed the distance. Titan's arms came down like falling timber. Bruce was already inside them. His left hand slapped the giant's right wrist aside. His right forearm drove across Titan's throat in a rising arc that forced the bigger man's chin up. For 1 full second, the 2 men stood chest to chest, the smaller body completely hidden behind the larger one from every camera except the hard cam at ringside. Then Bruce's right knee exploded upward into Titan's solar plexus. Once, twice, a 3rd time, higher under the ribcage. Each strike was short, ugly, and exact. Titan's breath left his body in a single explosive rush. His knees bent. His arms, still reaching, lost their purpose. Bruce stepped back exactly the same distance he had closed. He was breathing harder now, but the rhythm was still under his control. Blood ran freely down the left side of his face and dripped onto the blue mat in dark spots. He raised both hands in the classic Wing Chun guard, elbows in, fingers open, and waited. Titan stayed bent for 3 long seconds. When he straightened, his eyes were different. The giant who had treated this match as an amusement was gone. The man who remained had decided that amusement was over. He wiped his mouth with the back of one massive hand, looked at the red smear and nodded once, almost respectfully. Then he charged.
The charge of a 348-pound man across 12 feet of open canvas is not something most people ever see up close. It is less a run than a controlled collapse of the space between 2 points. The mat shook, the ropes vibrated. Earl Hebner threw himself sideways against the ropes to avoid being crushed. Bruce did not retreat. He stepped into the charge at the last possible moment, turned his left shoulder and let the giant's momentum carry past him by less than the width of a fist. As Titan's body went by, Bruce's right hand found the back of the giant's thick neck. 2 fingers pressed into the soft hollow at the base of the skull. At the same instant, Bruce's left foot hooked behind Titan's right ankle. It was not a throw. It was a suggestion. Titan's own speed did the rest. The giant's upper body continued forward while his lower body stopped. For a fraction of a second, his 348-pound frame was perfectly vertical and completely off balance. Then gravity remembered him. He hit the mat with a sound that rolled through the garden like distant thunder. The entire building felt it in the soles of their feet. Bruce was already moving again, circling to the giant's blind side, hands still high, eyes never leaving the place where Titan's spine met his skull. The match was no longer a novelty. It had become something the cameras were not supposed to show, and it was only just beginning. Section 3. Titan hit the mat so hard the blue canvas jumped. Dust rose in a thin cloud around his massive shoulders. For 2 full seconds the garden held its breath. Then the giant moved. He did not scramble. He rolled onto one elbow with the slow, deliberate power of a machine restarting. His braided hair hung across his face. When he lifted his head, blood was already running from a cut on his lower lip. He spat once onto the mat, a dark red mark that spread like a warning, and pushed himself to his feet. Bruce had not celebrated. He had not raised his arms. He had simply circled to the giant's left, maintaining the exact distance where Titan's reach ended and his own began. His bare chest rose and fell in controlled rhythm. The 3 scratches across his ribs still bled freely, painting thin red lines down his side. The cut above his eye had reopened completely. Blood ran into the corner of his mouth again. He ignored it. Titan stood to his full 6'10". The boredom was gone. The amusement was gone. What remained was the focused violence of a man who had just been made to look small in front of 19,000 people. He rolled his shoulders once, the thick muscles shifting like cables under skin, and raised both hands in a wrestler's collar and elbow stance. Bruce answered with nothing. He simply waited, weight on the balls of his feet, hands open at chest height, the classic structure that had carried him through every real fight of his life. The second exchange began without a signal. Titan closed the distance in 3 heavy steps. This time he did not charge blind. He came in measured, testing, one massive hand reaching for Bruce's head, while the other stayed low to cut off the escape. Bruce slipped the first grab by half an inch, let the second hand pass under his elbow, and answered with a rapid chain of finger jabs to the giant's exposed ribs. Each strike landed with a sharp, wet sound. Titan grunted, but his feet never stopped. He caught Bruce's right wrist on the 4th jab. The grip closed like a vice. Titan yanked the smaller man forward and drove a short, brutal forearm across Bruce's chest. The impact lifted Bruce off his feet and sent him stumbling backward into the ropes. The top rope caught him across the upper back. The middle rope slammed into his kidneys. For a moment, his vision went white at the edges. The crowd exploded. Titan did not give him time to recover. He stepped in, both arms wide, and locked Bruce in a full bear hug from the front. The giant's arms wrapped completely around the smaller man's torso, hands clasping behind Bruce's spine. The pressure was immediate and total. Bruce's ribs compressed. Air left his lungs in a single forced rush. His feet left the mat again. This was the position the posters had promised. The dragon crushed by the mountain. Bruce's face remained calm even as the air was squeezed from him. His arms were pinned at his sides. His chin rested against Titan's thick shoulder. Blood from his forehead smeared across the giant's dark skin. In the production truck, Ray Krebs was standing now, both hands on the console, whispering, "Jesus Christ, he's going to break him." Vince McMahon Sr. in the front row had stopped calculating ratings. He was simply staring, mouth slightly open. Bruce had 7 seconds of air left. He used the first 2 to stop fighting the hug. He let his body go soft, becoming dead weight in the giant's arms. Titan adjusted, squeezing harder, trying to force the smaller man into submission. That adjustment created a gap of less than an inch between their chests. Bruce used the 3rd second. His head snapped forward. The crown of his skull drove into the soft tissue just under Titan's jaw. The giant's head rocked back. The grip loosened by the width of 2 fingers. Bruce's right arm, previously pinned, slipped free just enough to drive 3 rigid fingers into the nerve cluster under Titan's right armpit. The giant roared. It was not a wrestler's theatrical roar. It was the raw sound of a man whose body had just received information it did not want. The bear hug broke. Bruce dropped to the mat on his feet, already moving. He did not retreat to safety. He stepped in again. A rising elbow caught Titan under the chin. A short left hook smashed into the giant's floating rib. A right vertical fist drove into the solar plexus for the second time in the match. Titan staggered backward 2 heavy steps. His back hit the turnbuckle. The metal post rang like a bell. Bruce followed. He trapped the giant's right arm against the ropes with his own left shoulder and began a rapid series of short, chopping strikes to the same rib he had already damaged. Each strike was economical, ugly, and precise. The sound of bone and cartilage absorbing impact carried into the first 10 rows. Titan tried to shove him away with his free hand. Bruce slipped under it and continued the assault. For 12 continuous seconds, the smaller man punished the larger one without pause. Then Titan's left hand finally found Bruce's hair. He yanked the smaller man's head back and drove a short, vicious headbutt into Bruce's face. The impact was wet and heavy. Bruce's nose opened immediately. Blood poured down over his mouth and chin. The crowd noise changed pitch, rising into something almost frantic. Bruce stumbled back 3 steps, blinking blood from his eyes. Titan pushed off the turnbuckle and came after him, no longer measured, no longer testing. Pure forward pressure. The giant swung a massive right hand that would have ended most fights on contact. Bruce ducked under it by less than an inch. The wind of the punch moved his hair. He answered with a spinning back kick that caught Titan flush on the side of the knee. The giant's leg buckled. It did not collapse completely, but the structure failed for half a second. That half second was enough. Bruce closed the distance, trapped the damaged leg between his own, and drove his shoulder into Titan's midsection. The 2 men went down together in a heavy, tangled heap near the center of the ring. They hit the mat with Bruce on top. For the first time in the match, the smaller man had positional control. Blood from both fighters mixed on the blue canvas. Bruce's face was a mask of red. Titan's lip was split wide. The giant's eyes were wide open, staring up at the lights, chest heaving. Bruce did not rain down punches. He did not seek the dramatic finish the crowd wanted. He simply controlled the giant's right arm, isolated it, and began the slow, methodical process of making that arm useless. In the front row, Vince McMahon Sr. leaned so far forward his chair almost tipped. In the production truck, Ray Krebs had stopped speaking entirely. The match that was supposed to last 2 minutes had now passed the 8-minute mark, and Bruce Lee was no longer the man who had been trapped. He was the man doing the trapping. Section 4. Bruce isolated the arm with the patience of a man who had studied the human body the way other men studied scripture. Titan's right arm was locked between Bruce's legs and chest, elbow hyperextended just short of the breaking point. The giant's face was twisted in a mixture of pain and disbelief. Every time he tried to bridge or roll, Bruce adjusted by inches, stealing the space, keeping the larger man pinned to the blue canvas. Blood from Bruce's broken nose dripped steadily onto Titan's chest, mixing with the giant's own sweat. The crowd had stopped cheering in the usual way. The noise had become something sharper, more focused, almost hungry. 19,000 people were watching a man half the size of his opponent methodically dismantle him in the middle of the most famous wrestling ring in the world. Titan roared and exploded upward with pure strength. The power of the bridge lifted both men 6 inches off the mat. Bruce rode the movement, stayed glued to the arm, and when they crashed back down, he drove his free elbow into the same damaged rib he had been punishing for the last 2 minutes. The giant's body convulsed. Air left him in a wet, broken sound. Bruce released the arm. He did not do it out of mercy.
He slid up Titan's body, locked his legs around the giant's waist in a tight body triangle, and wrapped his right arm under Titan's chin in a rear naked choke. The smaller man's body looked almost delicate against the massive frame, but the position was perfect. Bruce's left hand trapped his own right biceps. His cheek pressed against the side of Titan's head. The choke was not theatrical. It was quiet, technical, and absolute. Titan's eyes widened. His remaining good hand clawed at Bruce's forearm. The fingers were so large they covered nearly the entire limb, but they found no gap. Bruce tightened the squeeze by a single degree. Titan's face darkened. The veins in his neck stood out like cables. Earl Hebner dropped to both knees beside them, hand hovering near Titan's arm, ready to call the match the moment the giant's free hand went limp. The referee's face was pale. He had never seen a submission applied this cleanly in a match that was supposed to be entertainment. In the production truck, Ray Krebs finally spoke again. His voice was low and almost reverent. "Do not cut this. Whatever happens, do not cut this." Titan's legs kicked once, twice, then slowed. His free hand slapped the mat twice in the universal signal of a man who had reached his limit. Hebner's hand came down hard on Bruce's shoulder. "Break! Break!" Bruce released the choke immediately. He rolled off the giant and came up to his feet in one fluid motion, hands already raised in the open palm guard. Blood still poured from his nose. His chest heaved. The 3 scratches across his ribs had become a single red sheet. But his eyes remained clear and calm. Titan lay on his back for 5 full seconds, chest rising and falling in great, ragged waves. Then he sat up, slowly, the way a man sits up when something fundamental has been rearranged inside him. He looked at his own hands, then at Bruce, then at the roaring crowd. He did not look angry anymore. He looked finished. Hebner stepped between them, both arms raised, ready to declare the match over. The crowd was already chanting something that sounded like Bruce's name, though the syllables were lost in the thunder of 19,000 voices. Titan raised one massive hand. Not in surrender, in request. He wanted to stand. Hebner hesitated, then stepped back. Titan pushed himself to his feet. His right arm hung at an unnatural angle. His knee was already swelling. Blood still ran from the split in his lip. He stood to his full height and looked down at the smaller man who had just choked him unconscious in the middle of Madison Square Garden. Bruce stood 10 feet away, still in his guard, still watching the giant's center line. He did not celebrate. He did not turn to the crowd. He simply waited to see what the mountain would do next. Titan took one limping step forward, then another. The crowd noise dropped into a tense, electric silence. The giant stopped 3 feet from Bruce. For a long moment, the 2 men simply looked at each other. Sweat and blood mixed on both their bodies. The lights of the garden burned down on them like judgment. Then Titan did the last thing anyone in the building expected. He bowed. It was not a deep bow. It was not theatrical. It was the short, sharp inclination of the head that one warrior gives another when the argument is finished. The braided hair fell forward across his face. When he straightened, his eyes met Bruce's one final time.
Bruce returned the bow, exact, respectful, equal. The garden erupted. Hebner, still stunned, finally raised Bruce's right hand. The smaller man's arm looked almost fragile in the referee's grip, but the crowd did not care. They were on their feet as one living thing, screaming the name of a man most of them had only known from movie screens until tonight. In the front row, Vince McMahon Sr. was no longer sitting. He was standing with both hands on the railing, staring at the 2 men in the ring, as if he had just watched the future of his company rewrite itself in real time. In the production truck, Ray Krebs leaned back in his chair and exhaled for the first time in 9 minutes. One of the camera operators was openly crying. Bruce Lee stood in the center of the ring, blood still running down his face, chest rising and falling, the hand of a giant still raised in his own. He had entered the ring as a novelty. He was leaving it as something else entirely. The match was over. But the story of how a 5'7" martial artist had trapped, broken, and then earned the respect of the largest man in professional wrestling was only beginning to leave the building. And somewhere in the upper decks, a young boy who would one day become a champion himself was already replaying every second in his mind, trying to understand how the smaller man had never once looked afraid. Section 5. The boy in the upper decks never forgot the exact moment the giant bowed. His name was Tommy Ritchie, 12 years old. He had come to the garden that night with his father to see the mountain crush the movie star. Instead, he watched a man half the size of his opponent refuse to break, refuse to run, and finally force the largest wrestler in the company to acknowledge him as an equal. Tommy would grow up to become a 3-time world champion. Decades later, when interviewers asked him about the night that changed everything, he always gave the same answer. "I saw a smaller man stand in front of a giant and never once look like he was the one who should be afraid." Inside the ring, the formalities were already moving. Earl Hebner raised Bruce's arm a second time while the official announcement rolled through the garden speakers. The crowd noise had become a single, sustained roar that refused to die.
Titan stood a few feet away, still breathing hard, his damaged arm held carefully against his side. He did not leave the ring. He waited. Bruce turned to him one last time. The blood on his face had begun to dry in dark streaks. The scratches across his chest were still open. His nose was clearly broken. Yet when he offered his right hand, the gesture was steady. Titan looked at the smaller hand for a long second, then closed his massive fingers around it. The handshake was brief, firm, and final. No words were exchanged. None were needed. The two men left the ring through opposite sides. Bruce climbed through the ropes on the side nearest the tunnel. Hands reached for him from every direction. Security formed a narrow corridor. He walked through it without raising his arms or acknowledging the cheers. His focus was already inward, cataloguing the damage, the timing of every exchange, the places where the giant's strength had nearly ended the night. Behind him, Titan was helped down the other set of steps by two trainers. The big man glanced back once. Bruce was already disappearing into the dark of the tunnel. In the locker room, the atmosphere was electric and strange. Wrestlers who had been preparing for the next match stood in silence as Bruce entered. No one spoke at first. Then a veteran named Chief J. Strongbow stepped forward, nodded once, and simply said, "You made him real." Bruce nodded in return, accepted a towel, and sat on the edge of a training table while a ringside physician began cleaning the cut above his eye. Vince McMahon Sr. arrived 7 minutes later. He closed the door behind him and stood looking at the smaller man for a long time. The usual promotional energy was gone from his face. What remained was calculation, mixed with something close to respect. "That was not what we booked," he said finally. Bruce looked up, one eye already swelling shut. "No. The cameras caught all of it." "I know." McMahon was quiet for another moment. Then he asked the only question that mattered. "Would you do it again?" Bruce did not answer immediately. He looked at the blood still drying on his own hands, then at the closed door that led back toward the arena. When he spoke, his voice was calm and exact. "Only if the giant is willing to be honest." McMahon nodded once. Outside the garden, the night air was cool and sharp. Fans who had not been able to get tickets stood 3 deep along the barricades, waiting for any glimpse of the men who had just rewritten the evening. When Bruce finally emerged through a side exit, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. He did not stop to sign autographs or pose for photographs. He simply walked to the waiting car with the same controlled economy of movement he had shown inside the ring. In the production truck, Ray Krebs was already reviewing the tapes. Frame by frame, he watched the moment the nerve press opened Titan's grip, the 4-second escape, the body triangle, the quiet choke, and finally, the bow. He replayed the bow 7 times. Each time he shook his head in the same quiet disbelief. The match that was supposed to be a 2-minute novelty had lasted 9 minutes and 43 seconds. In those minutes, a 5'7" martial artist had been trapped, bloodied, nearly broken, and had still forced the largest man in the company to meet him as an equal. The footage would never air in full on national television. Certain moments were too clean, too real, too dangerous for the product. But the story left the building that night in the mouths of 19,000 witnesses, and stories like that do not stay buried. Years later, when Titan Vance was asked about the night in private, he gave only one sentence. He never looked small. That was the entire review. Bruce Lee returned to Hong Kong within the week. The scratches healed, the broken nose was reset, the blood was washed away. But something of that night remained in the way he moved afterward, a quiet certainty that size was only one kind of power, and not always the decisive one. In the upper decks of Madison Square Garden, a 12-year-old boy went home and began practicing the same open-hand guard he had watched under the bright lights. He did not know yet that he would one day stand in the same ring. He only knew that for 9 minutes and 43 seconds, he had seen a man refuse to accept the role the world had written for him. And that was enough. The night the dragon was trapped by the ultimate giant ended the way all true stories end, not with a victory pose, but with a bow between two warriors who had finally understood each other, and with a smaller man walking out of the largest arena in the world, still standing.